This is Ahval Online, meeting point of accurate news and free comment on the current affairs of Turkey. Welcome to our podcast series.
Hello and welcome to Talking Turkey. I'm your host, Ahval editor David Lepeska, and with me today is Yavuz Aydin, a former Turkish judge and from 2011 to 2014, Turkey's counselor for justice at the European Union. Thanks so much for joining us, Yavuz. How are you doing today?
Thank you very much, David. I'm good, and thanks for having me.
Great to hear. You are very welcome. We are speaking on Tuesday, May 26, one day after President Erdogan marked the Muslim holiday of Eid or Bayram by declaring that Turkey was nearing the end of its coronavirus crisis. But the number of daily cases and deaths in Turkey has ticked up in recent days, hinting at a possible second wave. A great deal of domestic and international concern has focused on Turkish prisons, where tens of thousands of detainees who have yet to be convicted and thousands more political prisoners remain even after the government released a third of the country's inmates in an amnesty last month intended to reduce overcrowding amid the pandemic. Yet, prison cases have been on the rise in recent weeks, and an inmate in Istanbul's Silivri prison died of COVID last Friday. On Sunday, Turkish novelist and journalist Ahmet Altan wrote in the Washington Post, quote, "I'm 70 years old and I'm in a prison where COVID-19 cases are spreading fast. Perhaps I will have fallen sick by the time you read this." The next day, leading advocacy group Amnesty International launched a campaign to free Turkey's political prisoners, saying their lives are at risk. Yavuz, you wrote for Ahval last month that you would blame Erdogan's government rather than the pandemic itself for the death of political prisoners in Turkey. Please tell us why you feel that way and give us your sense of the impact of this amnesty 6 weeks after it was passed.
Yeah, indeed, that would be the Erdogan government and his allies. If the pandemic hits so many people, it already started to hit actually. Pursuant to the information provided by the government itself, I don't know how much we can rely on these figures, but even they say there are hundreds of pandemic cases in Turkish prisons. And
right, well, reportedly there are just 82 in Silivri alone.
Yeah, only in slavery, that's 82, according to the Ministry of Justice figures. So it's a really alerting situation in terms of not only justice, in terms of humanity, because it's not a secret that Turkish prisons are still overcrowded and no sanitary possibilities. So even after this new law about early parole and probation to just let some 90,000 inmates go home, they excluded all these so-called terror-related criminals, and even the inmates, those are in pretrial detention, they are also excluded, and they are left to sort of death in Turkish prisons. The reason why I'm saying this is that even after releasing some 90,000 inmates, which were all violent criminals, including the sexual criminals or criminals of extortion, theft, burglary, such things. Even after this, the prison population in Turkey is not less than 210,000, which is still much above the normal capacity of Turkish prisons. I mean, the capacity which was supposed to be in accordance with the CPT standards of the Council of Europe. CPT stands for Committee for Prevention of Torture. So, according to these universal and European standards, the capacity of Turkish prisons is not more than for 114,000 inmates. But in 2018, the government just increased so-called capacity of the prisons through some instruction stuff. And they just added some more beds. So they just built some walls to get some more rooms, some more wards to put the inmates in. But this is not in line with the international standards. So when you put some more beds or when you just divide some rooms or wards, it doesn't mean that that's the capacity. So even after the release of 90,000 inmates who were all violent criminals, those remaining in prisons are still staying in, under abnormal conditions, which is not in line with international standards.
So you say that not only are there still detainees, people who haven't even been convicted of crimes are still in prison, and people convicted of kind of thought crimes, political crimes, but also this effort, this amnesty meant to reduce overcrowding hasn't even fully reduced overcrowding.
Yeah. Because they used this wind of corona pandemic to pass this law. Again, it's not a secret that this government and its ally, nationalist ally, have been waiting for an opportunity to pass this act to release some people who are in prison for mafia crimes, for other violent crimes, and they just couldn't find the right formula to exclude these political prisoners, who most of whom don't have anything to do with violence or real terror. We are talking about more than 50,000 people who really don't have anything to do with crime or violence, but they are put in jail thanks to the vague anti-terror legislation in Turkey.
Right. Let me ask about this. Last week, Erdogan told a gathering of judges and prosecutors, quote, "If people don't trust justice, neither peace nor security can be preserved." Yet his government has weaponized the charge of terrorism to an unprecedented degree in the last few years. The practice is not unique to his Justice and Development Party, or AKP. It goes back decades in Turkey, but it was revived, you could say, during the Ergenekon and Balyoz trials about a decade ago, and then again following the 2013 Gezi protests, and then again with the 2015 return of violence in Turkey's southeast, and then particularly since the 2016 coup attempt. Please, if you could give us a sense of how broadly Erdogan's government applies this crime of terrorism and the extent to which this has damaged Turkish justice.
Yeah, you are right when saying that the judiciary and the acts of judiciary were weaponized for decades in Turkey against different segments of people, against different political groups, depending on the time and the conditions. I have very, very interesting memories about this, actually. So those were the turning points in my life when working as a judge in Turkey. I can talk about them later, but as you said, judiciary was never independent at all in Turkey. But as some young judges, we and many other people really had a high hope for the things to get better in Turkey. So as you mentioned, I worked as the counsel for EU affairs in Brussels for the Turkish Justice Ministry and Turkish judiciary. So those were the years when Turkish justice reforms were all praised by Council of Europe, by the EU, by the UN, and everything, every step taken in those years were really the steps taken in the right direction. it was really branded like this by the EU and other reports. So we really had some high hopes to believe that things would change. But again, after these Ergenekon and Balyoz cases, we saw how things really, our dreams collapsed, I can say. So we saw again that the judiciary was used as a tool to suppress some people, to intimidate people. Some people were intimidated for being a member of, in Turkish, Çağdaş Yaşam or other associations or be labeled or branded as Ergenekon people. So it was, I think, a continuation of a tradition in Turkish judiciary. So it goes not different for many people who are in jail for being a member of PKK or DHKPC also. And now, after some hundreds of people being intimidated and being imprisoned for being allegedly a member of Ergenekon, now it's the turn for, Gülenists to be intimidated. Unfortunately, this is the tradition in Turkish judiciary and Turkish way of thinking for the state.
Well, let me just ask really quickly. You said it's a continuation, but is it not kind of at unprecedented levels now regarding particularly the Gülenists after the failed coup?
Yeah, of course. It's it was, the judiciary was never independent at all, but it was not this dependent actually in the whole history, even after the military interventions. So the number of people detained or intimidated for being member of other so-called or really terror organizations didn't reach even 1/10 of this number. So the number of people having been prosecuted for being a Gülenist or being member of so-called FETÖ organization exceeded 600,000. It's unbelievable. So more than 260,000 people were detained for some days or for some weeks, up to 1 month. And out of this number, almost 100,000 people have been arrested by judges, and some 35,000 of them are still in prison after almost 4 years, including some 500 judges and prosecutors.
Yeah, this is personal for you. After the July 2016 coup attempt, you, I believe, were among the thousands of purged judges and prosecutors dismissed from your job, I presume on charges of having some connection to the failed coup. Could you please tell us a bit about that? How did you first learn that you were being dismissed, and what was your response? Yeah. What happened then?
So, just in one sentence, I can summarize this process like this. I went to bed as a judge and woke up as a terrorist. So, really, that was so unbelievable. It was,
so before it happened, you had heard nothing about it possibly happening to you.
Many people in judiciary were expecting a kind of attempt to purge, or how can I say, like a next level in intimidation of dissident judges or prosecutors. But nobody expected anything this crazy, because even that night, it was Friday, 15th of July, 2016. I was working on my files, which were due for next Tuesday. So And then I saw all those things on TV, and I was shocked as millions of people in Turkey. I was in Manisa, by the way. So I was shocked, and I was stuck on the TV screen for hours, and it was like 6 a.m. when I went to bed, thinking that, okay, things are under control. So whoever did it, it will be found out. So I was, of course, sure the government or Erdogan would abuse this because I saw him live on TV as all of us saying this was a gift from God. But I didn't expect this gift to be such huge. So in the morning, I already went to bed after 6 a.m. in the morning and woke up at 10 a.m. with a phone ringing. So, and, then I learned that there were lists of judges and prosecutors to be dismissed and arrested. So there was a WhatsApp group of these, government-backed group in judiciary, which is Unity in Judiciary. In Turkish, it's Yargıda Birlik. So they had this WhatsApp group, and they all had these lists on their phones. So only.
Oh, you're saying already the next day this was happening?
Yeah. Oh, the next day, very early in the morning. This happened while I was sleeping. So even before 10 a.m. in the morning. So that's why I say I went to bed as a judge at 6 a.m. in the morning and woke up as a terrorist at 10 a.m., 4 hours later, as a terrorist. So this was incredible speed. I learned that the Council for Judges and Prosecutors convened with the agenda of dismissing thousands of judges and prosecutors after 8:30 in the morning. So they just finished their work by 11 a.m. But even before they finished their work, this list of approximately 3,000 judges and prosecutors were already disseminated through, via WhatsApp to the members of this unity in judiciary.
And why do you think you were on that list? Did you have some connection to Gülen? Did you attend a Gülenist school or anything like this?
No. First of all, I'm really proud of being included in that list. If I was not on that list, I would ask them to include my name on that list. Not because I'm a Gülenist. So I have nothing to do with Gülenists. I even didn't send my children to those schools, or I didn't attend to any Gülenist school. I didn't have any account at Bank Asia or those, they call it photometre. It's not only in army. They use the same in judiciary to profile people, actually. But I don't have any of those criteria. My wife is my childhood love. But that makes you more dangerous, because when you don't meet any of these criteria, you are crypto member. So that's even worse. And another reason for me particularly to be included in that list is that while working here in Brussels as a counselor for justice, representing Turkish judiciary at the EU, or when I was working in my court at the bench, I have always tried to behave as a judge. I told this to the ambassador here and to all my interlocutors that I have this title of diplomat being here in Brussels. But before all these, I'm a judge. So even though I'm not wearing my robe when performing my duty here, it doesn't change the fact that I'm a judge. So for that reason, I really told what I think about the truth. So and this was very well known to my colleagues and many other people. But till things changed so dramatically, till 2013, it was not a problem, because not a big deal was hidden. So there was nothing to hide till then. But when things started to get complicated, this style of mine became a problem. And Bekir Bozdağ, he was the minister when I was withdrawn from here, from Brussels to Turkey again. He said he lived the worst day of his life because of me. When he was in Brussels, that was his first visit to abroad, that was Brussels. And when he saw the atmosphere here in March 2014, there was this draft law on internet, on draft law on High Council of Judges and Prosecutors. He saw the criticism here, and he blamed me for this, for sort of espionage, or for being a traitor.
So because you were willing to listen to this criticism and such.
Yes, so I was a judge, and I said, every day when I was getting out of home, I was telling my wife that she should be ready to pack things to return to Turkey, because they knew I was doing this. They knew I was not lying to bow my head to them. They knew I was talking about the truth, and they knew that I told even to the ambassador here, who is now the vice minister for, deputy minister for EU affairs in Turkey. They all knew this, that I was not hiding this. I was not doing this behind doors. I was saying that as a judge, there is a danger in Turkey. Judiciary has been used as a tool against some people, and that now again another phase is about to start. So with the formation of this unity in judiciary by the government, so they are doing their best to take over the judiciary.
Right. You said, speaking of the purges, you said nobody expected anything this crazy.
Yeah.
Looking at the judiciary today, after these purges, all those dismissed judges and prosecutors have been replaced mostly by young, inexperienced ones who are largely unable to handle this spike in terrorism and coup-related cases, according to, as detailed in a special report by Reuters published this month. The report found that close to half of Turkey's 21,000 judges and prosecutors, at least 45%, the report said, have just 3 years experience or less. And in some provinces of Turkey, the average age of judges is 25. One Istanbul lawyer told Reuters of a judge who actually asked for help writing the ruling in the case because he wasn't sure how to do it. So, Yavuz, explain to us, please, what sort of impact does all this have on Turkey's justice system?
So it's the effect the government wanted to have. That's what they want. They don't want an efficient judiciary, but they would want an efficient judiciary which would just judge in their favor, as it's the case today. But in this process of transition, I don't think the government is also complaining about this, because nobody cares for justice anymore. And before hiring these 10,000 or 11,000 new judges and prosecutors, they had this plan to purge this more than 4,000 judges and prosecutors. But they were waiting for the right time to do this, and they found the right time and opportunity as gift from God with this July 15 coup attempt. So they used this, and they just started operating their plans, realizing their plans. So then to replace these almost 4,500 judges and prosecutors dismissed, they hired 11,000 new ones. But even before then, even before 2016, starting from 2012, the government had already started to employ new, unexperienced judges and prosecutors, the number of which is not less than 3,000.
So this was already all happening, or most of this was happening before the coup. The coup just allowed them to accelerate it.
Just accelerate. But I wouldn't expect them to exaggerate this much. So they want this judiciary to be the perfect tool to consolidate their autocracy. It's not something unique to Erdogan government or to Turkey, actually. We saw many different examples in different parts of the world in different times. Before the Second World War in Germany, in Italy, and after the Second World War in Argentina, the Peron government, and in Uruguay in 1970s, 80s, and in Spain's Franco administration. So we saw all these things. So the governments tend to take over judiciary to consolidate their power, to consolidate autocracy. Because when you take over the judiciary, when you have this power, there's no obstacle before you. There's nobody to provide checks and balances. So there's no way to provide rule of law. So that's the red apple for these people. So they had this chance and they took this chance. That's what happened.
Well, you say there's no rule of law. There's nearly no rule of law. But sometimes Turkey's justice system seems confused, as in the case of Ahmet Altan, who I mentioned earlier. He was released from jail and then jailed a few weeks later. And Osman Kavala, the same thing. He was cleared of charges in February and then rearrested several hours later. Why does there seem to be this confusion, this ambiguity? Why is it not just treating harshly its political enemies or perceived enemies?
Yeah. So let's take it from the broader picture to specific cases in 2 minutes. So they took the biggest step after 2016. And there were still some honorable judges. I believe there are still some honorable judges, and I know there are some honorable judges in Turkish courts sitting in benches. But this number was, let's say, 200 or 300 last year, and now it's diminishing and diminishing every day.
So they're still purging judges even as we speak. We're just not hearing much about it.
Yeah, they are doing so, not with the numbers of thousands, but one by one, or at once. 5 judges are being persecuted and prosecuted, and they are suspending them, as we saw lately in Ayşe Sarısu Pehlivan's case, the chair of Turkish Association of Judges, a very small, very tiny association with less than maybe 100 members in Turkish judiciary, which was one of the 2 tiny associations, 2 tiny groups in Turkish judiciary which refused to be included in this unity in judiciary, this farce. So there are 2, Demokrat Yargı, the Democratic Judiciary, and Association of Judges. So the heads of both have been intimidated and suspended last week, just because of some tweets in favor of life and peace rather than death and oppression. you know, this
And
cruel
Turkey's
judge.
the government is also pushing back against bar associations for its recent support
Yeah,
of
yeah.
LGBTI people in Turkey. Yeah.
But this no no offense. I'm not really blaming or shaming these people to have acted in this way, but this reminds me of this famous German theologist during World War II in Germany, this Niemöller. So first they came for Jews. We didn't just raise our voice because we were not Jews. Then for communists, then for leftists, for syndicate people. Then when they came for us, there was nobody around us to raise voice. So this is happening in
Mm-hmm.
this way. Some people, some hundred of people in Turkish judiciary didn't raise their voice those days. So it was really, really difficult to do so. Again, I say I'm not blaming them because I saw and I heard many similar stories about this. I saw a colleague of mine who was arrested by his colleague and after this arrest decision was announced, this judge who arrested his colleague comes down from the bench, hugs this guy who was arrested a minute ago, and he whispers to his ears that, forgive me, brother, I had to do this. There was no other choice. They are arresting the ones who refused to arrest. So
Mm-hmm.
I have children also. So I will take care of your children. Don't worry.
But
So
just
this
to
was the
return. Oh,
ambience.
sorry. Please finish.
Yeah, no. This was the ambience. So under this conditions, I can't blame people for not having raised their voices to the extent they should have done. And now, this government is intimidating the others, starting from the outer circle. So they don't want to have any other exceptions. They want full obedience. They want really full loyalty. So this is the situation now, unfortunately.
Speaking of using the failed coup as an opportunity to get rid of enemies, I wonder what you think of what the Turkish government has done to the pro-Kurdish People's Democratic Party, or HDP. The party's former co-leaders, including former presidential candidate Selahattin Demirtas, have been in jail for more than 3 years, along with dozens of prominent politicians. In addition, the government has dismissed and replaced more than 120 HDP mayors in the past 4 years, including 45 just since last year's local elections, and that has left all the mainly Kurdish cities across Turkey's southeast without any real leadership. As a former judge and counselor of justice, how does all this look to you?
Yeah. In the beginning of this podcast, I said this is the new phase in this tradition, which is really much more exaggerated this time in numbers and in quality and quantity. They are really doing really crazy things. But for Kurds in Turkey, it's not a new thing actually. So as they are now, they have been intimidating more than 4,000 judges and prosecutors by blaming or labeling them all for being Gülenists, which is not the case actually. But for this Kurdish political movement, it has been the same for decades. And let me tell you one thing. When I was trying to understand something, when I was here working in Brussels, there was this case against Pınar Selek, a sociologist based in France now, who was accused of being a member of the HKPC and accused of having been involved in this Mısır Bazaar blast in Turkey. So I really, since it was this trial phase, the file was not secret and it was not confidential. So I really worked this file because it was really interesting. There was one indictment, and then a trial, then an acquittal decision, then the Yargıtay, the Court of Cassation of Turkey, was overturning the decision, and again another acquittal, and again the prosecutors of Yargıtay, Court of Cassation, were preparing a new petition to take it to overturn this acquittal decision. At that stage, I really wanted to talk to these prosecutors about the basis of what they were doing. So, Hasan Erbil, he was the chief prosecutor of Yargıtay, and he referred me to the prosecutors in charge of this in Yargıtay, the prosecution office. So I met with them. I asked my questions because, just because of a few cases like this, like Pınarselek's case, all the steps we were trying to take were, being thrown into the trash. So they were really shadowing the progress and the reform steps.
Well, right.
Them.
I mean, this sort of persecution of the Kurds and the Kurdish political movement has been happening for years, for decades. But is it not harsher against the HDP in part because the HDP has had such success in parliament and politically?
Yeah. Just to talk about that. When I talked about this, so I saw that there was nothing, and I said, this is nothing to be, to be indicted or to be sentenced. So there is this principle in criminal law: if there is a suspicion, that's the accused to make use of this suspicion. So you should just operate this principle. And they laughed. There were 5 of them. 4 of them, I'm sure, are still in office. 4 of them are not dismissed. So they laughed, and I asked, why are you laughing? And they said, you have been staying in Brussels for many years. So we have been keeping tens of thousands of people in jails with much less evidence than this for being a member of DHKPC or PKK. That was a really, really a turning point in my life. So I had such really experiences at different levels also.
And that was in 2012 or something like this?
Yes, that was 2011 or 2012. Okay. So this is the mentality. Yeah? So, and what happened afterwards is, again, when you have such a wind, such a gift from God to abuse, they are making most use of it. Because there was the state of emergency, which lasted 2 years. So in this course, they amended the constitution. So they just vanished the checks and balance system formally also, not in practice only. So they just eradicated freedom of expression, freedom of media, right to property. All these things have been just eradicated in a way which it's almost impossible to reverse now. So they took this chance against HDP also, like all other democratic groups.
You say it's almost impossible to reverse. What do you think the activists and dissidents and figures from the HDP and political prisoners and lawyers and judges who've been dismissed and persecuted? What might they do to try to begin to change this? Is the only option just reaching out to international organizations and media outlets? What can be done, if anything?
To be honest, international organizations, international NGOs have been doing and they're still doing really great stuff. And they have been trying to be the voice of these voiceless people. So they have been pushing the Council of Europe or EU or UN bodies to react in the way they should have. But unfortunately, when we talk about politics at international level, the parameters are really different. So I can say many people believe that there is no justice at international level. Even at national level in Turkey, there's already no justice. But at international level, there are many other parameters, elements to be taken into account by other states and the international institutions or the supranational institutions like EU. This is called realpolitik. In the end, this is the bitter reality of the world, unfortunately.
Do you mean, for example, the Council of Europe has called for Demirtas to be released, but Turkey has essentially ignored that order? Is that what you're referring to?
That call is not a big deal, actually. So that is this committee of ministers of the Council of Europe to force Turkish government to execute these decisions, to release Demirtas, to release Osman Kavala, to release Alparslan Altan, who was the member of Constitutional Court and dismissed and arrested, and ECHR, the European Court of Human Rights, ruled in favor of his application and said, he was dismissed and arrested illegally, so he should have been released. But after almost 7 months or 9 months now, he's still in jail. So the public in public opinion, such known figures are being spoken about. But there are thousands of others also. But the Council of Europe Ministers Committee is doing nothing. And EU, in this sense, is like a captive because of this refugee crisis. Keeping these 4 million Syrian refugees in Turkey. And we saw how Erdogan weaponized these millions of refugees by pushing them to Greek border and even taking them to Greek side, causing that fuss at the border. So they showed they are serious. And after each step taken by EU to stop Turkey from breaching international law in Eastern Mediterranean or about Cyprus and other things, Turkey is using this card. After the statement of European Council here about this Mediterranean water issue, so Turkey again said, okay, we are lifting the controls at border with Greece. So every time they are threatened or they are called on stopping these breaches, they are using this card. So this is the reality, unfortunately.
So it's like a warning to European bodies to not be too aggressive, even in regards to Turkey's judiciary, or it faces this threat of another wave of refugees.
Yeah. This is, unfortunately, this is what they call realpolitik. But the main frustration at this point comes from ECHR, European Court of Human Rights. after so many years, they are still not taking the steps they should have taken for many years. And they are still talking about effective domestic remedy in Turkish judiciary. And exhaustion of these domestic remedies is still as a requirement to reach the ECHR.
Well, what steps should they be taking?
So this is, first of all, the peace penal magistrates, sulh ceza hakimlikleri in Turkish. You are arrested, then you need to appeal against this to another peace penal magistrate, and then you can go for arrests only. You can directly go to the Constitutional Court, and after the Constitutional Court, you can go to Strasbourg, but for arrest only. But both for peace penal magistrates, which are exactly the mercenaries of the government in judiciary, they are the most trusted judges in judiciary, are appointed as peace penal magistrates.
You mean the most willing to follow kind of the government's orders, Erdogan's orders?
Yeah. So, and in Venice Commission reports, in EU Commission reports, in Council of Europe reports, this peace penal magistrates have been criticized in terms of lacking independence and effective remedies, closed circuit system, and there are many facts and figures about this. We are talking about 1/3 of Turkish judiciary having been sacked after this 2016. But, by then, the number of peace penal magistrates being dismissed, can you guess how many of them were dismissed?
200.
A number? No. Three. Three out of 718 peace penal magistrates, 3 were dismissed, and afterwards they reinstated the other 2, and just one has been dismissed in the end. So they were already the most trusted ones, the most willful ones, the most loyal ones. So these are in the reports. I'm referring to the report of the European Union, the EU Commission, about these numbers, and the Dunya Mijatovic's report about this from Council of Europe. So this about this European Court of Human Rights have some rulings criticizing this, but still they say, there is this Constitutional Court as an effective domestic remedy in Turkey. So, but when we come to discuss this Constitutional Court, there are many cases. They showed they cannot be regarded as effective domestic remedy in many cases.
So you're saying the ECHR should focus more on this peace penal system? Peace
penal courts and the Constitutional Court also. So there are allegations and there are suspicions about the cooperation and collaboration between the European Court Human Rights, at least with Council of Europe and the Turkish Constitutional Court, to be within to be regarded as effective domestic remedy, because if this rhetoric fails, there will be hundreds of thousands of cases reaching Strasbourg at once, and they don't want this to happen. They don't want this huge backlog, and for this reason, even the European Court of Human Rights is unfortunately becoming a part of the problem rather than the solution.
Okay. I've taken so much of your time. Yavuz Aydin, a former Turkish judge and formerly Turkey's counselor for justice at the European Union. Thank you so much for all your time and your insight and your discussion. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you. That was my pleasure. Thank you.
You can follow Ahval News Online podcast series through Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, Google Podcasts, SoundCloud, and Spreaker. All you need to know about Turkey is here, for your ears, mind, and attention. Thank you for listening to our podcast.